Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk, Gen XY and Race in America. This is a virtual conversation between young women of color as they navigate through the emotional impact of systemic racism following recent racial injustices. This discussion is presented by Shades Magazine, celebrating all women of color, an online publication and information and resource site sponsored by Exceptional Women in Publishing, also known as EWIP. My name is LYNDSEY ELLIS, and I'm a member of the EWIP Board of Directors and assistant producer for Real Talk. Before we get started, I'd like to get some housekeeping matters out of the way. Our producers have muted your mic. However, if it's not, please be sure to mute your microphone now. And for those new to Zoom, you can find the tools bar at the top of your screen or by hovering over your mouse along the bottom of your screen. There you can find the chat room and other tools you may need or want during today's talk. If you have comments or questions for today's guests, you may place them in the chat and they will be read by today's host. Please be sure to include your name and your city. You also can ask for it to be read anonymously. Feel free to disable your video if you so choose. We also have a lot of viewpoints that will be shared today. A reminder to be respectful of all guests and participants. It is important to note Shades Magazine and its fiscal sponsor, Women in Periodical Publishing, Exceptional Women in Publishing, is a non-political, non-partisan organization and as an entity does not support or endorse any political candidates or campaigns. The opinions, viewpoints, and/or personal endorsements expressed in any published print, audio, or video content are those of the individual only and do not necessarily represent the view of Shades Magazine or Women in Periodical Publishing, Exceptional Women in Publishing. We are recording today's session for viewing on the Shades website and on our YouTube channel next week. So let's begin. I'd like to now turn it over to today's host and moderator. Sydney Clark, a New Orleans native, is a multimedia freelancer and current graduate student at the University of Maryland College Park, studying multi-platform journalism. Sydney also is a contributing editor for Shades Magazine. Sydney, welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everyone. Today I'm joined with some of our members of our #RealTalk crew, and today we're talking about more alike than different, Black and Asian cultures explored. Our Gen XY women of color move beyond stereotypes to discuss food, spirituality, arts, music, the swirl, and ultimately the connections between the two cultures. And I would like to welcome today's guests. And after I just say your name, can you just give the people a wave for me? Today we have KERRI EBANKS, who's a digital manager for Washington State Democrats based in Seattle. Hi, KERRI. And we have SHARKISHA CUMMINS. She's a stay-at-home mother of 2 and aspiring social worker living in Rochester, New York. We have Asifa Akbar, who's a certified life coach and author studying to become a licensed practitioner of immigration and refugee law, who lives in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and today's Asifa's graduation day. So happy graduation, Asifa. We're so excited for you to, this is such a big accomplishment, so congratulations. Anna Lee is currently the operations manager at the Washington State Democratic Party, also living in Seattle. She happens to be friends with KERRI. And Fanny Fang is a small business owner, human-driven activist, and former candidate for Riley County Commission, District 2, living in Manhattan, Kansas. Thank you so much for joining me, ladies. And we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to talk about. But feel free to learn more about the participants via a link in the chat that will be sent out. And we also invite those in attendance to join in this discussion by asking questions and posting comments. And so feel free to ask all the panelists a question or individual. All right, ladies, let's begin. So this is my opening question to all of you guys. What does cultural identity mean to you? And it can go in whatever order you guys want to answer in.
I guess I can go first. My cultural identity, I think that ties to for me, it ties back to my whole roots. my Black roots, my Dominican roots, and how far back that reaches, and it like ties into like how I eat, how I relate to others, how I raise my family, and like even the stories that I tell my kids. You know, like it ties into how I feel respect is given and given and how you get it, and it ties into literally any and every interaction that I have within my community and outside of it.
Thank you, Sharkisha. Whoever wants to go next can go.
So I'll go next. You know, this is something that I continue to think about after having ran a campaign in Kansas. You know, people would not think that I'm from Kansas, but you know, this is home. And you know, my parents are, you know, they immigrated from Fujian, which is like southeastern China, rural village. And having come here, you know, in a way, so of course, like, you know, similar to Sharkisha, like I think about the ethnic identity that we have as being Chinese, and being Chinese on the high level, but then even filtering it down to being Fujianese, which has its differences to other regions in China. And then, you know, coming home to two parents who are still, you know, after 20 something years, still assimilating to the American culture. And then me having gone through the American education system, having been raised, not just, you know, here in Manhattan, Kansas, I really much feel like a lot of people say this about the community, but here it's very tight knit. It's a big reason why my parents decided to settle here, because it very much gave off that like rural village vibe where everyone knows everyone. And so when I was on the campaign trail, I had people who I never thought knew me, but they would be like, "Hey, I remember when you were 5 years old running around your parents' restaurant." And so, you know, when I think about cultural identity, I very much think about my Chinese roots, but I also have to remind myself that that I am also very much American. That's how I was raised. I was born Chinese, raised American, and then now as an adult, I have these two worlds like colliding, and especially running for political office, I felt that every step of the way. For example, earlier today, I was sharing with a friend that, you know, I take a lot of pride in the American flag, but with the recent political divide here in the United States, the American flag scares me as a Chinese woman. You know, if I was speaking as American, I'm like, I'm proud, but as a Chinese woman, I'm like, like when I would go door knocking, there were three things I would look for: a Trump flag, a Blue Lives Matter flag, and American flag. And if any property had that, I would not go alone. I would have to bring a white person with me for me to feel safe enough to do that. So as you can probably tell, my cultural identity is all over the place. I'm still learning exactly what that is right now. So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Thank you so much for sharing, Fanny.
So I don't mind going next. Can everyone hear me? So I'd just like to build on what Sharkisha and Fanny just said. For me, cultural identity is to a large extent about my cultural and ethnic roots. But as Fanny was expanding upon, especially in the North American context, I feel like increasingly, or I see cultural and cultural identity as something of a choice as well. Because I can only speak from my own personal experience. For myself, I also come from a highly multicultural background, and I think many people from the North American context especially understand what that means, you know, growing up with multiple allegiances and identities. And for myself, I am actually I came to Canada as an immigrant, as a child with my family from South Africa, the Republic of South Africa. And I'm actually a 4th generation South African Indian. So if I'm of South Asian descent. I've never been to India though. I've lived in South Africa and Japan and Canada. But most of my life in Canada. So I think increasingly as an adult, you know, you get to choose your allegiances, and I make it a conscious choice. I know what's important to me, and it's based on my values and principles. And you know, when you're a child, you just sort of absorb the identity that's around you in your environment, and you have multiple influences, whether it's from your parents or from school and just media, you know, TV, movies, and things like that. But for me, as an adult, what I like is that I can choose what I want to identify with, and my choice is I see myself as a universalist, but you know, a person of color, a woman of color, and a woman of South African, Indian, Canadian descent, and a Muslim woman. So those are the big points of identity for myself personally.
Thank you so much for sharing, Asifa.
Yes, I can go next. So,
is anyone else getting underwater, Kerri?
Yeah. Okay, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, is that better now?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I was just saying that I see myself as my younger self. I identified culturally just as a like Black, you know, child from America, and I didn't really know anything outside of that lane other than like, you know, the Black Southern like stereotypical listening to Soulja Boy and Hurricane Chris, and just like very, very surface level. Nothing really complex about it, if that makes any sense. And I completely agree with what Asifa said. As you grow up, you learn that your cultural identity is a choice. And so there are certain things that I couldn't necessarily choose about what I identify with, and then in terms of race and socioeconomic status and things like that. But as a choice, like growing up and to becoming an adult and to becoming a like professional in just the work field, learning to identify with other people that come from your same socioeconomic background, but that are like, you know, trying to matriculate like you. That I know that's one like way that we do identify with people that, you know, come from the same struggles that we come from, and wanting to like just create generational wealth and things of that nature. And I also identify more with my Southern roots as an adult than I ever have as I did growing up, because of all of what I thought was just surface level thinking and surface level movements throughout our maybe city. I'm originally from New Orleans, so maybe surface level thinking throughout our city, throughout the way we just contributed to society as a whole. It's much rooted in a lot of our ancestral background. And so it is deeply rooted in the way the entire world moves, if that makes any sense. And so I've learned to identify with that culture of being not necessarily me as a creator, but like just identifying with women of color being like a creator of movement throughout the world, if that makes any sense. And so that like expands your cultural identity. And how you just are able to identify with any woman and her, and you know, his struggle, you know, in the way they are moving throughout this world, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Kerri. And Anna, would you like to expand on our current question?
Yeah, You know, the first thing I thought about when I read about today's specific topic is um, one time my mom had mentioned to me, like, kind of offhand, I don't know what the context was, and she was kind of like, you know, I feel like Black people and Asian people have a lot in common culturally. And I'm going to take a few steps back before I tell you what she said. Is my mother is also an immigrant, and she is an Amerasian child, so she has curly brown hair, and a much lighter complexion than I do. Her father was a white American GI, and so that's the context as to how that side of my family came to the United States. No formal education, but my goodness, can she pluck a chicken and use an axe far better than I can. And you know, we have a very today racially, ethnically, culturally diverse family. I've always grown up in racially diverse places. You know, people always say I was like the only person of color in all like white space, or, you know, it was only like Latinx people at my school, but like, you know, my community was actually very racially diverse. And so, you know, though my mom was an immigrant, she has interacted with, had meaningful relationships with people of all racial backgrounds. And so she says to me something along the lines of like, and these are not exclusive only to Black and Asian people, but she says something along the lines of like, they also really like fish. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, having lived in Maryland, Sydney, I know you're in Maryland. I lived in Baltimore for a couple of years, taught ninth grade English in the Baltimore City schools, where almost virtually every single one of my students was Black. If there is a place that sells lake trout and chicken, or any kind of combination of chicken and fish, there will be Black and Asian people in there, I guarantee you. Whether like proprietors, owners, like whoever, there will be Black and Asian people in there. She also said, you know, there's an emphasis on family. There's like, if you're going to find multi-generational homes, it's going to be in Black and Asian homes. And, you know, as I'm listing off these are all cultural similarities: the food, the family. And there's an emphasis too on respecting your elders. If there was anything that was going to get you slapped directly on the mouth in my house, it was not paying enough reverence to your elders. And in specific ways, right? Like, one of which would be the very explicit emphasis on titles and language. You know, there is a greeting that you use in the Vietnamese language for elders within your family, outside of your family, whether it's the maternal side, paternal side, if they're older than your parents or younger than your parents. If you mess it, like that's, and then, you know, if you don't say sir, ma'am, like it's an issue. That's all part of culture too. So, you know, taking this question to my first initial reactions, and, you know, my mom's very, I think, thoughtful insight onto the similarities between, also talking about fish, catfish. The only two people I know that eat catfish are like Black people, and specifically like Southeast Asian people. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I will leave it there.
I mean, that seems right to me. I mean, coming from Louisiana, like, catfish is huge, so at least I could say yes to that extent.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing. Go ahead, Sharkisha.
I was just gonna say another thing too that I think the Asian culture and Black culture has in common too is like the community mind when it comes to, or village mind when it comes to like rearing your children. Like that there's like this big family involvement, like the grandparents are involved, aunts and uncle, everyone's very much like, I mean, I remember as a kid, like if I did something wrong, I could hear it from like the whole neighborhood. It wasn't just like my grandmother or my mom. It would be like literally everyone was like, okay, Keisha, what do you think you're doing? So it's like you kind of have like all these elders, and it's like everyone gets that same level of respect. It's like you have all these aunts and uncles who aren't really your aunts and uncle, but they're your aunts and uncles. And they have that like authority and that power over you in a good way, where they're just like are kind of just helping guide you along. And it's great to have that kind of community, especially I'm noticing that now with my kids, just to have that.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because like thinking about my childhood, like I would call, you know, a bunch of my, well, what I know now as family friends, but back then I would call them like Uncle Wilbert and Uncle Daryl. So it's just like, you know, it's something that is definitely unique culturally. And looking back on it, I was really appreciative of like, you know, I still call them by Uncle Wilbert, Uncle Daryl, just to symbolize like how close-knit my family is with them. So thanks for mentioning that. So I want to go into our next question. And with the holidays right around the corner, tell us some of your favorite traditions that you typically do with your family and or friends, and are they cultural or religious traditions?
I want to go first. Oh my goodness. And it's because it's, you know, I won't talk about the winter holidays coming up of like Hanukkah, Thanksgiving, whatever, because I mean, we celebrate them in my family, but it's not anything super significantly different. But in Vietnamese culture, the single largest holiday of the year is Lunar New Year. Do not call it Chinese New Year, because guess what? More people than Chinese people celebrate it. It's Lunar New Year. And like, it's, to put it into like context of how significant it is, like Vietnamese people in the motherland, they don't have many holidays. They work like 7 days a week. And just like, they don't even like close businesses early on Sundays. Like they work really hard. But for 2 weeks during Lunar New Year, you cannot catch a cab, you can't find a place to eat. Everyone like goes to their like hometowns, their mother's hometown, their father's hometown, all of that. And just some of my childhood memories, the most vivid ones, go back to Lunar New Year. And it was very strange, like how my family would find ways to celebrate it in Washington State. Now, like the Southeast Asian community is much larger in Washington, but at the time, like it was significant enough that we had like our own grocery store. There were like faith services in language, but we still like literally knew everybody. That's how small it was. But you know, the memories are like just the smell of the fireworks that they had in the street. Also, my siblings and I literally picking up pieces of the dynamite that hadn't like blown off yet, tying it together, and apparently like playing with gunpowder in hindsight is what we were doing. Would not recommend. And, you know, this is also where I remember, you know, you have to say something like to every elder, happy Lunar New Year. I wish you XYZ in the coming year, fortune, health, like I did not know Vietnamese growing up, so that was like the most Vietnamese that I spoke all year round. But we did it because that's how you get your lucky envelope. And you want that lucky envelope, you know, because for Christmas, we didn't have a lot of money. It wasn't a big Christmas. We didn't have a lot of money for like birthday stuff, but you know, that Lunar New Year money had you feeling good, because basically every older person had to give you a lucky envelope because that was their luck. Like, you're going to take this money because if not, I'm going to have a terrible year. So that's something that I took with me as an adult. When I taught in Baltimore City, I got envelopes for each and every one of my students every year that I taught there. And, you know, I had like this little ticket system, college credits, where if you had a certain number, you could get like a full-size candy bar. I was that teacher. And I gave them their lucky envelope with college credits in it. And the students would keep the envelopes like all year round. They would keep their credits in it. They would just kind of like marvel at it. And, you know, something that I learned of, you know, if you want someone to share something about themselves, they have to share something, you have to share something about yourself. That helps overcome that barrier. And for my students, you know, like I said, all of their peers were Black, their communities incredibly racially segregated. Had they ever met a Vietnamese person before? Probably not. So that helped kind of overcome the like, who is this woman? Why is her last name only spelled with one E? Where is Washington State? Like, you know, why is she so loud? Helped them get to know me. And, you know, I took that too to the workplace this year. KERRI earlier this year got a lucky envelope too. So, and that still, you know, it sparked conversation. I left a little note explaining, you know, what year it was, why it's significant. And I know some people still have their envelopes. So, yeah.
That's so awesome. You learn something new every day. So I appreciate you for sharing those insights about the holiday. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I may say something, Anna, I can relate with respect to the money envelopes, even though I come from a Muslim background. We have our major holidays are at the end of Ramadan and the end of the pilgrimage month. So it's called Eid. And around the world, children at Eid time from their elders, they usually get some form of money, or it's equivalent to the money envelope. So I can certainly relate to that. But as far as the holiday season, or what we understand to be the holiday season in the Northern Hemisphere, well, around the world, at the end of the, I guess it's the Gregorian calendar, then it's in December, or December and January, around the winter solstice for us. That's a time, like, even though we come from a Muslim background, when we immigrated to Canada, we started up, you know, the first few years we would put up a tree as well and exchange Christmas presents, but and we do observe, you know, not in a religious sense, but also Thanksgiving and the Lunar New Year as well. So I really come from a very multicultural background. My parents were very open-minded, and were just open to, you know, respecting other cultures and traditions and incorporating those into our own lives as well. But ironically, even though we came from apartheid South Africa, when I was about 5 years old, I still have a picture of this. It's my sister, my second sister, and I were sitting on Santa Claus lap in a department store, and he was a white Santa Claus, and this is apartheid, and you know, so we were and little Muslim Indian girls, but we have that. Christmas was an exciting time for everyone, regardless of your cultural background. But yeah, I personally like to note and celebrate, in a way, all traditions, all holidays. Like last weekend was Diwali, and you know, I'm not Hindu, but I remember the beautiful lamps that used to be set out in neighbors' yards and things like that in South Africa. And to me, it's just about celebrating the universal aspects of each holiday. So I think that's important, regardless
Thanks so
of
much.
what your background is.
I agree with everything you said. That was great. Thank you.
I think what Asifa said is so important right there, like celebrating the universal background of everyone's holiday and like just celebrations and traditions. That's something that I'm trying to implement more and more in my adult life. So like, just thank you for saying that, so we can always remember that that's the true meaning. And it means like embracing other people's cultures as well. One thing that I can say is that we don't have a lot of traditions in my family. Holidays always look a little bit different. It's never like the same, like we're going to this one set person's house for the most part. So holidays look a little bit different. All of my siblings are pretty much older, and so they've oftentimes been away in college for Thanksgiving and things like that. But one thing that I will say that I've tried to do since a very young age was take a picture with Black Santa. And in New Orleans, there is a specific Black Santa that recently passed away. But yeah, so that's one thing that when I think about all of the things that I've probably had one specific tradition, I've tried to take a picture with Black Santa. And now I've passed that tradition on to my first nephew. So my sister was just like, well, we have to go to this specific mall to like get the picture with Black Santa. And it's, if anyone is familiar with Atlanta, we have to go to South DeKalb Mall. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Atlanta, but I did not want to go to South DeKalb Mall for 2 reasons. Atlanta's super spread out, so it's like 40 minutes away. Also, yeah, I just didn't want to go to that mall. But I thought it was best to keep that in a tradition of a family. Just like, it's not, I mean, to some people, it's not that big of a deal. Honestly, to some people, it's really not that big of a deal, but it's a huge tradition for people to have Santa Claus that looks like us, right? It's just a feeling. And if I can be completely frank with you, my dad tried to surprise me with white Santa, like our neighbor dressed up as Santa one time, and I literally ran from him at a young age. And it's not, for me, it wasn't about like a black or white thing. It was just like who I saw to be Santa Claus. And like my dad was a black man that was gifting me things, right? Just how I interpreted things. And so that's something that's for sure, that's something that we implement, trying to implement more of like Kwanzaa stuff. And then also, one thing that is a tradition, but is really not a tradition, is Mardi Gras. So it is a tradition, being that like we celebrate it every year in New Orleans, and Mardi Gras is gives me more of a Christmas feeling than Christmas does to me, if that makes any sense. I grew up in a super religious family, so Christmas presents weren't open before church. Christmas was always about like Jesus, and I completely agree with that. So that's why Christmas was never like the top tier holiday for me, if that makes any sense. Because it wasn't about gifting. It was, you know how some people love Christmas because it's about gifting and it's about enjoying their family and stuff. We just really kept Christmas pretty simple to remember just our religious background with it. But Mardi Gras is probably the top tier holiday for me, mainly because it's the only day that I have an excuse to drink at 7 a.m. If you don't have Jack in your coffee, then you're doing something wrong. But it's also like the day that I get to see generations of families. So we don't necessarily have a huge tradition, but we have like a location that we've been going to for years. And so this is a New Orleans thing where it's like you go to your spot and that's your spot. You don't really switch up the spot, but it is very interesting to see my older cousins that I have pictures with my older cousins when I was probably like 12, 13 maybe. Even younger than that, we were taking like photos in the same spot. Now they have their kids, like my like great nieces and nephews and stuff, on their necks, like trying to get Mardi Gras beads and stuff. So it's like a complete drastic change. When I was 12 and they were in their like late 20s, now they're in their early 40s with kids, and I'm an older adult now being the one drinking. I think that is like the tradition. Like I say, like there's not, to me, it's very surface level. It's not too many details that are wrapped up into it. But when you really look at it and you weed through it throughout the day, like Mardi Gras is literally the best thing that could ever happen to probably the South. Because not only does New Orleans celebrate Mardi Gras, but it's New Orleans, like areas of Mississippi and Mobile, Alabama. So it's one of those places where it is probably the best thing to happen to the South, but it's also a real place where like it's the first place probably ever I've seen so many worlds intersect. It does not matter who you are, where you come from, like your worlds will intersect. Like you may think, oh, this is a hood, like this is, not this or that. Like you will literally see the like white judge that you see all the time in like somewhere where you consider maybe like a hood. Like I don't know how to necessarily explain it for people that are not here, but it is, just imagine. No, okay, I was about to say like Jeff Bezos in the hood, but that's not really it. But it literally like, just think about like think about some of the top tier people of like your hometown or something like that. And now imagine a place where people think about it as like the low of the low, right? Because we live in that a capitalistic society and a classist society where people think like that. Classism literally really intertwines within itself. Like it's just I don't know how to explain it other than like everything intertwines. Everything.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to what Kerri's talking about. I haven't been to Mardi Gras in several years because of things I've been doing for undergrad and just because I'm moving, I live away from home. But like, that's one thing that I miss about Mardi Gras is the community. Like people I used to go to elementary school with, I see them all the time at parades. And so it's like everyone just like, whatever your fears are, like whatever is going through your head, like that doesn't matter. Like Mardi Gras is a time to come together and just see people you haven't seen in years and pick up where you left off. So I really miss Mardi Gras for that aspect. Is there anyone else that wants to talk about what holiday traditions or any traditions that they celebrate throughout the year? Go ahead.
So it's kind of because I'm half Dominican, so we have like two different cultural like holiday experiences, which is kind of neat though. Like for example, well, Thanksgiving I'm mostly with like my Black family, so it's kind of really neat because literally everyone comes over. So you have like all the aunts, all the cousins, literally everybody there, and there's like ridiculous amounts of food. Like it was funny because like my husband, he's white, and so their Thanksgiving is like typically turkey, mashed potatoes, squash, stuffing, and like that's it. Cranberry sauce, which is like crazy to me. First of all, it was crazy to me that people eat mashed potatoes on Thanksgiving. I never heard of that until him. But like apparently like a lot of people do. Okay. And like dinner rolls like that you buy from the store that's like pre-made. And that's like so different because like we would have like homemade biscuits, homemade cornbread. We'd have a whole turkey. Then we have like a fried turkey. Then we have like a whole chicken. Then we have like lasagna, and we have macaroni and cheese and potato salad and mac salad and like deviled eggs, like literally anything you can think of. We have like all of it, like chitlins, pig feet, like literally everything, ribs. So and then it was kind of neat because like we all dress up. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're all in the house, but we all have on like our Sunday best, and like and it's like, so the table's decked out nicely, and like it's like a really fun experience. And like you can tell like literally by like the music how it changes, or like when the cards come out, like when we kids needed to like go away, and like, you know, like once the Marvin Gaye comes on or the Al Green comes on or like the Spades are playing, then it's time for us kids to find something else to do, and like trying to like convince each other like to stay over, like you talk to your mom, no you talk to your mom, you know, and like them being aggravated. Like I'm sure I'm gonna have that now as I get older, but like when we were younger, like come on, you can just stay, and them never leaving. And so it was always like such a great time. Like I love Thanksgiving, and like there's no breakfast that day, there's no lunch that day. You just wait hungry, smelling the food till it's time to eat. And if we say dinner is gonna be ready at 2, you're probably not gonna eat till 5, you know, but it's like a good time. And I remember my grandma would be in there like the night before, like prepping everything, and she'd make all these pies from scratch, all these cakes from scratch. Like I remember cutting my fingers on the grater, grating coconut for the coconut cake, like fresh coconut. Like it's a great experience. And like obviously I can't scale it that large now because my family's so small, but it's kind of cool just to like blend the cultures, and like we'll have some of what you have some of what we have, so that my children can have that. And then Christmas, so for my Dominican side of the family, Christmas Eve is like Christmas. So like everything happens on Christmas Eve. It's like a big deal. All the family comes over to like one house, all the aunts, uncle, cousins. We all celebrate like all day Christmas. We cook, we open presents, and then Christmas Day, you're kind of just what your like immediate family, or you go to work even. But like, and that's when I lived in New York City. And what my grandmother used to do is, she'd make us each our own little box under the tree. So we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor growing up. So even some of our things weren't even wrapped. Some of it was wrapped, some of it wasn't. And then she put it in a box. And in that box, you'd have all these different like mixed nuts and fruits. And it was like the coolest thing ever. And it was like, I love that. And I didn't realize how much I loved it till like now I'm older and I want to have kids. Like we didn't even have stockings. So like we do stockings for the kids, but like I definitely like have to incorporate now that box of like the mixed fruits and the mixed nuts and the fruits and all that kind of stuff, and just have that because it was just a really cool experience. And we'd have like dinner and we'd watch like Twilight Zone all day because it'd be on TV. Then the last holiday that I'll talk about is New Year's, because that's two different things that we do too. Like with my Dominican family, we have this tradition where we get 12 grapes, and each grape represents 1 month, and you eat each one of the ball drops, you eat a grape, and that grape you make a wish, but the wish isn't for you, it's for someone else, and it's supposed to represent the 12 months of the year, like the good wishes that you have for someone in your life, or for anyone, like a well wish. And then with my Black family, it was completely different. We'd have like certain foods that we would eat that represents like black eyed peas, for example. I think it represents like good luck. If I'm wrong, I could be wrong, I don't know. But we have like certain things that we'd eat, and then like you'd have to clean your entire house because you want to bring in the new year with a clean house and a clean, fresh start. You had to have money in your pocket so that if you did, when you go into the new year, it's like bringing wealth with you. You couldn't have like at the stroke of midnight, you couldn't have someone like unemployed come in. The first person who comes in has to be like an employed person, because I remember one time my uncle was like unemployed at the time, but he was like coming, and my grandmother like refused to let him in, like, no, go away. Wait till somebody else walks in and then you can come. I know a lot of people, I didn't particularly, but I know a lot of people spend it in church, like till that ball drops, and then they'll go out after, like to the club. Like to me, it was, even now it feels weird, like to know that a lot of people spend it like at the bar. So that to me feels super lonely and isolating. Like I love being home and with family. And then DR, they are like an hour behind from us. So like at 11, we're calling there and we're like wishing Happy New Year's, and we're doing the sage through the house, like just bringing on the good spirits and everything like that. And then when the ball drops, it's like a big celebration. So yeah, but always spent with family.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sharkisha. I was laughing behind my mute button, so thank you for sharing. So I want to go to the next topic, and this is, I want to go back to your childhoods. If you can recall, what was your first experience meeting or being aware of someone outside of your race, and then more specifically with someone Asian or Black?
So I don't mind speaking about that. But I just want to go back to Sharkisha's lively discussion there. I can relate so much to so many of those things, because even from my background, like on Eid celebrations, you know, before that, there's at least about a week or two of prep in cooking, and from the elders, especially my mother in where we are now. But yeah, it's except for the coconut part, because I'm allergic to coconut, but she would always make something. If she made something with coconut, she'd make something with almond, ground almonds for me, so as a substitute. But anyway, getting off topic. So yeah, awareness of, you know, actually this is something that is so a profound realization that I had over the years growing up in Canada is when we first came here as immigrants. I mean, we were coming from, again, apartheid South Africa. We lived in separate neighborhoods, went to separate schools. It was an all Indian school with a few, maybe some other mixed race persons. And we interacted with people of African descent, maybe more in terms of the labor that used to come into the different areas. And it's very sad, it's tragic aspect of apartheid. You know, everyone was living in separate neighborhoods, and then the African people had curfews and they had to go back to their homelands, or Bantustans as they were called. And Europeans, like I can recall maybe 3 interactions or 4 most in my whole first 10 years in South Africa with people of European descent. So our neighborhoods were divided, and then there were 2 poor, there was a kind of poor white neighborhood across from my grandmother's house. And these 2 poor white girls used to see me come to my grandmother's house after school, and then they would sometimes come over, and I would just remember at least 1 or 2 conversations with them. And they were probably hungry, or, you know, but they also just came to make friends, because children don't know. They don't know race and prejudice and racism, things like that. So, and I just remember my grandmother telling me, like, you know, be careful, don't play with them too much. And, you know, also they were not too clean, but she would give them tea and sandwiches just like myself. But when we came to Canada, suddenly I was in grade 5 or 6, and suddenly I'm thrust into a multicultural setting. Of course, that was more than 30 years ago, so it wasn't as multicultural as it is now here in my part of Canada, or anywhere in Canada. But that's when I first started to realize that I'm different. I never knew that as a child. I never really thought about that as a child, like, oh, I'm actually not, like, I actually have a color in my skin, or, you know, you don't think about that. Your sense of normal is just, you know, you're just a child, you're going about, yeah, you know, there are different types of people, but you're not so conscious of that. And what heightened my consciousness, unfortunately, was, and this is ironic, having come from apartheid, but when we came to Canada, that's when I experienced the most direct actual discrimination and racism in school, being teased at school, you know, being told, like, you're worse because you're brown. We came when I was just about to enter middle school, and that's a very tough time for a lot of, we called it junior high here in Canada, but it's a very tough time. You're going through puberty, and you're interacting now with different people. And I was only, in my middle school, I was probably one of about 4 or 5 children of color in the entire school. I went to an academic junior high, and, you know, I remember the teachers talking to me and another girl of color because of when I would go home and I would tell my mom what I was experiencing, then she related to my dad, and he would come and talk to the principal. Then the teachers tried to, you know, help us and see how they can listen to our stories of, you know, what we were experiencing at school. And there were some other schoolmates where their parents invited us over to their house, and, you know, tried to be inclusive and things like that. But just experiencing that for the first time directly, those were my initial experiences. But now, I mean, flash forward, you know, 20, 25, 30 years later, and I have nieces and nephews who are mixed race, or I don't really like to use the word, I mean, race is, you know, construct, but I mean, in terms of, they have some European descent and my background as well. So yeah, it's very interesting to have gone through that experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. It was really insightful, and you know, I just appreciate you for sharing your experiences. That's what this platform is here for us to talk about these things. So thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Keisha. Okay. Well, so just a tidbit from the previous question about food. I also celebrate Lunar New Year. I'm Chinese, and so when Anna was talking about it, very much resonated with it. The whole cleaning the house thing is a big deal. Also wearing red underwear is a very big deal. I don't know if that's the case for Vietnamese, but yeah, we have to wear red underwear for on New Year's Eve, I believe. We have to wear red underwear, or for some reason we get bad luck. So I just wanted to share that tidbit. The other thing I want to share real quick is, and this has been on my mind a lot because, you know, we're seeing this COVID surge here in the United States. And I've been asked a lot. So my family, we own an ethnic grocery store here in Kansas. And so when we were talking about food and whatnot, I have data that backs up, like, you know, what it's so just fascinating to see some of my African customers buying Chinese products and Indian customers buying Jamaican products. Like, it's just amazing to see the intersection. You know, Lunar New Year, as Anna said, is such a big holiday, and there's a lot of traveling. And something that I got asked quite often on the campaign trail and also running this business is, how did we know as a small business the impact of COVID? Because we were the first business in our town to require mask wearing for employees and customers. We hired a security guard to have to monitor foot traffic, all of this. And people were just like, how did you know? As if we had like a secret. And the secret was the fact on Lunar New Year last year, no one could go home in China because of COVID. And so that's how we knew that it was a very serious deal. And so I just wanted to share that information about, you know, how big this holiday was and seeing how people were stuck where they were, that, you know, that ripple effect, and how that kind of informed me and probably some other Chinese folks in the area of like how big this situation really could get. Now, directly about this question about what was your first experience with someone outside your race. So I did not realize that I was, you know, so like I went to a Catholic school growing up. My parents were very keen on private education. They never got an education, so they thought a private education was the best education. Now I would not necessarily agree with that, but I understand where they're coming from. And one thing that I really appreciate about the Catholic school I went to was they did recognize that I was the only Chinese student in the classroom. And so they did, so every time Chinese New Year came about, they made it about me, which was really nice. They invited my dad into the classroom to share about Chinese New Year. And in hindsight, you know, I just thought, oh, this is a cool day about me, you know, so I didn't think about it from a racial or ethnic standpoint. I was just like, this is cool. It's about Fanny Fang today. When I realized though that my skin or that my appearance did, that was different from others was when my parents. So I worked for my parents at a very young age. One of my duties when I was like 8 or 10 years old was to answer the phone as they were like cleaning up the kitchen of the restaurant. It was late at night, we were about to close and whatnot. Phone rings and I pick up. I'm like, Dan Buffet, how may I help you? And the person across the phone says, do you cook cats and dogs? And that was the first time I realized that there is something different about me. And I think in that moment, I could not pinpoint that it was because of my ethnicity or my race, but I was just like, you grow up and, especially I guess more cultures are more accepting of like domestic animals. And my parents grew up in rural China, so they didn't really have the concept of domestic animals. But here, dogs and cats, they're the things you love. And for someone to ask me that at a young age, I was like, that's weird. Then there was one time I went to school. There was this drink I loved called Yeo soybean drink. Loved yeah. Loved it so much, and I was like so excited to go to school and share it with my classmates and whatnot. And unfortunately, the one person I shared it with was like, "Oh, that's disgusting," and that like really took me aback because I was like, "Oh man, I was so excited to share this, and now you're telling me." And so I live with this feeling. So I don't think that I was cognizant of my racial difference with my peers, but I just knew I was different in some way. I don't think it was until college when I went to NYU that I was like, oh, so this is how, just seeing the difference and how people treated me was a huge eye-opener. And seeing how, quite frankly, how also Asians treated me differently. So one thing I was in East Texas, in a rural East Texas town, volunteering for a football camp, and I was asked, did you face a lot of racism in Kansas? The first thing that came out of my mouth was, yes, I did, but I think the part that was harder for me to cope with was that I had people who looked like me told me that I did not belong to that race because of how I speak English, because I don't know how to speak fluent Chinese. And then so not only did I feel lonely amongst my white peers, I also felt very left out amongst my Asian peers as well. And then when I went to NYU, I found more people who looked like me, but also could not speak Chinese, and we could relate on all of that. And then with, and the second part of the question about first experience with someone, with someone Black. So I always got along with Black people. And I think a big part of that was, quite frankly, like, we were Black and Asians were the anomaly in a predominantly white school. And so we just gravitated towards each other. My best friend is Black. All my best friends all my best friends are Black. We have a great time. Anna talking about being loud. I'm very loud too. I laugh very loud, and I love to play music. A lot of things where you can like intersect with the Black and Asian culture. So, and the other thing is, I found a lot of, I give a lot of gratitude towards the Black community, especially here in Manhattan, Kansas, because when I felt very left out, or I had issues like within my own family and like generational differences and whatnot, my Black friends were the ones who brought me in. And so, I did not realize how much this country underappreciated Black people until it didn't hit me in the face until Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem in protest against the injustices against Black and brown people. And that was the biggest eye-opener for me.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Fanny. Would anyone else like to go before we move on to our next question?
I'll go. I think that for me, the first time that I really had like an actual like interaction with someone of Asian descent was in high school. The high school that I went to at the time was like a health professions in New York City in human services was like fairly new at the time. I think it was like the majority of kids that went there. The makeup of it was maybe, I want to say like 50% white, like 30% Asian, and like 20% other, which would be Black, Hispanic, and all that. And I remember, I don't even think I was, okay, so just to backtrack a little, like my only other interaction with like seeing Asian people was on TV or at the Chinese restaurant around the corner where they have like a really thick accent. I don't know if you guys remember Christmas Story, the movie where they have like it's very like, you don't realize all the stereotypes that are like in shows or in movies that they like kind of like do. So I just assumed that that's how like all Asian people were. So when I went to high school, the first time I saw an Asian, they were smoking a cigarette, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're not 21, they're smoking. That was like pretty much it. I didn't even think anything like about like that they were different, other than like they're my age and they're smoking, and I was like shocking to me. And then like I became friends with them because we did have like a lot in common, and I think I was surprised that they sound just like I did, and they necessarily didn't have to have an accent, and that even if they did have an accent, it didn't have anything to do with like their level of education or how smart they were. And it's always implied that if you don't sound 100% American, then that means that you're like lacking some kind of intellect, and that's like 100% not true. They actually are like probably more smarter than I am. They like can speak 2 languages, whereas I can speak 2, but like I'm just saying like that people don't realize that. So that kind of was just like my only like kind of introduction. I didn't really know a lot about like the stereotypes about like eating cats and dogs until I think I was in my late 20s when you start hearing like the ignorant, like people saying kind of ignorant things or like stereotyping. And by then I've of course recognized like stereotypes are that, and like cultures are different, and different doesn't mean bad. So really, that was just kind of that. Like, I just found that, I mean, I have like a ton of Asian friends for that reason, just because we had so many things in common. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yes, go ahead, KERRI.
Yeah, so one thing that I always try to let people, like, just explain to people when they're not from New Orleans, is explain like the public high school experience. The New Orleans public high school experience, outside of like a couple of high schools, is mostly like Blacks and Asian Americans. And so I don't necessarily remember, like, I've always interacted outside of my race since a very young age. So I can't really pinpoint like just exactly when it started. But what I will say is I remember like getting more into high school and getting closer to like Asian friends. So the thing that I had in common with my Asian friends in middle school and high school is that we started like the emo phase when we were in Facebook and stuff. So when we started like that emo and like, you know, like razor blading your hair really straight, like that is something that we always connected on. And so it moved from like us talking about those little things that we find interesting in school to me going to like their Lunar New Year celebrations, and in New Orleans, like they call it Tet Festival. And so oftentimes I try to think about why I'm not as close with my Asian friends from like middle school and high school, that like I'm not as close to them like back then as I am now. And I often think about the disconnect that we had with the generation before us. So for example, my mom would never really like call up their parents to say like, hey, like, can KERRI come over? Can KERRI do this? Or, you know, KERRI's going to the festival today with your kids. But she did want to know like the numbers for my Black friends, if that makes any sense. And I don't think it was any prejudices on like any like conscious like prejudices on her part, right? But I think like her not creating that connection within her own world, like left room for me to have a disconnection with my friends. And because like, you know, we, you know, lost touch and things like that, you know, I still connect with them, but it's not as great of a level as I do now, as I did before, I'm sorry. And just specifically, there's my one friend, Christine, that I always went to her house after school. And I learned about the family dynamics of like multi-generational family homes, and what that truly meant, and just all of the things that, you know, that she did in her own culture, like just how we were literally one and the same, and just how her mom is just, you know, I don't know if this is like a negative tone, but like literally the backbone of the family. Like her mom is literally like the matriarch and the woman that, you know, like, you know, women of color in their family have like the same similarities that, you know, we all do, like, especially with Black women. And so that I learned all of those dynamics, just going to her house after school, if that makes any sense. So.
And just something that I will always cherish is that when I did go to like preschool and like kindergarten, I also went to a Catholic school. And before Hurricane Katrina in 2005, my school was very mixed racially. After it kind of flip-flopped, it was majority Black and like very few whites. But I did go to school with a lot of Vietnamese. The Vietnamese population in New Orleans is very huge, and so I went to school with a lot of Nguyen's, and they were all related. And my kindergarten teacher was actually a Vietnamese nun, and she is one of the, I guess, teachers that I remember most. And so this is a picture of us. I loved her to death. Her name is Sister Ha, and she actually taught us a lot of things about Vietnamese culture, and including teaching us how to use chopsticks. So that's how I learned chopsticks at a young age. And it's just very emotional because, like, I remember having a lot of Asian friends back then. And then that kind of like, after I left home to go to college, it kind of like flip-flopped. So where I went to school, I don't remember having like a huge population at Spring Hill, KERRI, because we went to undergrad together. I don't remember having a huge population of Asians there. So I think from then on, my relationships with Asians kind of like downsided. And so I'm trying to like kind of make that, you know, turn around, because like my Asian friends from middle school and elementary school, like we were super close. And then after everybody spread out and went to different high schools, we still talked, but we still, you know, kept close with each other. So. Okay. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask something.
Go ahead.
It's building on actually what you said, what Sharkisha, some things that Sharkisha and I believe it's Fanny as well said. And it's made me think about this topic of diversity, because even within our own perceived cultures, there's a great deal of diversity. Like, I think, you know, if you use big categories like African and Asian, that doesn't really tell you the whole story, because I know from my own experience, like I'm of South Asian descent. I've never been to India. We have a lot of cultural traditions that were passed down to us. So I still, you know, we eat food from around the world, but like a lot of Indian food as well, and the clothes, the music, everything like that. So, so internal diversity, like even though there's a lot of people that I meet here in Canada that are from India or Pakistan or other parts of South Asia or the diaspora, and there are things that I can relate to them on, but there are many things that I cannot relate to them with. So if you're talking about interactions between, you know, Blacks and Asians, sometimes I feel like you can identify more with, you know, aspects of non-Asian cultures. So actually a lot, because I guess I just come from a very multicultural, like cosmopolitan upbringing. But I remember one incident, like in South Africa as a child, when we were visiting Durban, which is my dad's birth city. We would go there every weekend, and it's a coastal, you know, the biggest port in Africa, I think, still, but it's or maybe, and at least just in South Africa. But I remember as a child looking out the window, and we saw this Japanese ship there, and then there was a Japanese, I think he was a Japanese man, but I mean, we just assumed that he was. And I remember looking out the window and pointing, and it's like, oh my God, look at that Japanese man. Or, you know, because we've never seen, it was only mostly Indians that made up the Asian population at the time in South Africa. But now there's, you know, Chinese, there's all Filipino, from what I understand. But then flash forward, after graduating from undergrad here in Canada, I went to Japan and taught English in Japan. So, you know, getting the in-depth exposure to East Asian culture. And that's the thing, like South Asian is very different from East Asian and Southeast Asian. And even one of my pet, like something that bothers me is when people think that Africa is one country. And it's, you know, it's something that just, it's like, really, okay, you have exposure to the internet, you can, most people do right these days. So it's extremely diverse. There's different nations, different ethnic and cultural groups, hundreds of different linguistic groups, traditions, all kinds of things. So I don't think we can really generalize and say, okay, this is Asian culture, this is African culture. And then it's also with the context that you look at, you know, what's your frame of reference? If you're looking at it within the US, what's the interactions between so-called Asians and African Americans? Like, is that what you mean by Asian and African? Because it's really, if your frame of reference is even global, then you are able to see like that it's just so much more diverse, the interactions and the identities and things like that. So.
Thank you so much for sharing, Asifa. And we actually have an anonymous question from one of our viewers that I would like to ask you guys. So it's kind of long, so it's also in the chat that you can read along. So we are now 8 months into a global pandemic, and unfortunately, the increase in COVID-19 cases and deaths. This is prompting many states to reevaluate how best to stop the spread, and the first most common way is to mask up. So according to the Pew Research Center, about 4 in 10 Black Americans, 42%, and 36% of Asian Americans say they worry a great deal or a fair amount that other people might be suspicious of them because of their race or ethnicity if they wear a mask or face covering in stores and other businesses. And about a quarter of Hispanic adults, 23%, and just 5% of white adults say they worry about this. What are your thoughts or experiences about this question, or does it prompt any memories or recent experiences from you guys?
So I will start, and I'll try to keep this short. I literally thought about this the other day because this has been about 10 years within 1 year. And so the other day I was just like, oh, remember that point during the pandemic where like Black people couldn't even leave their house with a mask on because we would just get harassed? And I mean, I'm not saying that's something that has stopped, but like that was a serious fright in us. Like that was a serious fright. And it's still to this day, like we have to, like Tyra Banks taught us to smize, right? It's still like, to this day, I'm not very on edge about it, but I'm still to the extent of like, okay, what tone am I bringing off with my eyes? Like what, and so oftentimes depending on where I'm going, especially now that I'm in New Orleans rather than working out of Seattle, and I go through a lot of like other rural parts of Louisiana. So, like what am I wearing with this mask on? I've been known to look a little militant in my look sometimes with the combat boots on a regular basis and the beret on a regular basis. So that's what, other people like to call it, but I just like to call it, that's how I dress. But I say all of that to say that it is something that we still fear. I think the mass-wide, like the nationwide mask mandates have helped with that just a tad bit. Just because like a lot of the times I'm interacting and just like doing everyday stuff. And it seems like even masks have a cultural identity. It's very, very strange. But like low socioeconomic class white Americans are not wearing masks, but all like, for the most part, majority Black Americans that I see are wearing their mask, like Black people are wearing their mask and people of color are wearing their mask. And so that already puts you at a defense line and just a defense line against each other, right? It's the strangest thing ever. How does masks become cultural tools and whatever? But it's a strange thing. I don't know if it's going to go away. I highly doubt it, because if I can be frank with you now, we're about to start wearing masks and beanies to keep us warm, right? And so I don't think it's going to go away. I think as we get more and more mask mandates, then we will, have a little less pressure on it. And I hope that we will have a little less pressure on it, but it is still a very, very sad trade. I would like to hear from like the Asian Americans on here actually, just about how you guys actually feel about the xenophobia with it. Still, like if you guys still see and get xenophobia with it sometimes.
Yeah, KERRI, I feel that so much. And one reason why I ran for political office was because we had a county commissioner here who made racist comments about the spread of COVID and it being associated with the Asian population, and that because we have a small Asian population here that we're less susceptible to it. And a grassroots justice group reached out to me to make a public comment at the next county commissioner meeting, and I did. And what this county commissioner, so there's 3 county commissioners, all 3 of them said to me that they love Chinese people because they love Chinese food. One other person said that they appreciate Chinese people because they pay their bills on time. So yeah, so this was all, and this is all like recorded. They knew they were being recorded, and they still had the audacity to say that. Funny thing is, and then another kind of commissioner started talking about the Bamboo Buffet, which is owned by my uncle, and saying how he loves eating there. And I was like, I've never seen you eat there. So I don't know what you're trying to do here, but we're not on the same page. And after that, after making that public comment, I made a Facebook video to give my reaction, because they wouldn't let me give my reaction at that time. I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it on my own platform. And it was shared hundreds of times in my community. And that's how I got all this support to run for office. Now, you know, with our grocery store, so like our grocery store is called the Asian market. So it's, you know, and so the storefront itself, it invites xenophobia. And we were terrified. You know, my dad actually was the first one who said we should be wearing masks in this business. And this was before even the concept of mask mandate was a thing in our country. You know, being Chinese, and you know, it's very normal for people in mainland China and in Hong Kong, I think in a lot of Asian countries, to wear masks. And so my dad said it to me as if this is not a big deal, do it. But I was so scared to do that because I was worried that people would see that and come in and harass us for doing that. And then also requiring people to do it. So that's why we had to hire a security guard. We were just like, we're trying to adjust to this new reality. And we're also terrified that something as simple as wearing a mask could invite violence towards us. And so, you know, even though, you know, it just, you know, we own a small business, so we were hit just like everyone else. We were hit pretty hard financially, but we were like, okay, money or your life. That's something my therapist always asked me. He's like, money or your life. And I was like, I'm choosing my life. No way, you know. And so yeah, I think for me as an Asian American, it's just you know, it's the fear of people attacking you. I think the other thing is, and I think for especially Asian American men, I think wearing masks makes them, because there's this perception that Chinese men are more feminine than other men for whatever reason. And so I also had people, men in my family, who refused to do it because they just associated it with femininity and they felt emasculated by it. But I think it's more of a societal issue here in the United States and how they think about, historical, Anna wrote historical basis for the feminization of Asian men. Yeah, exactly. So those were, some of my experiences as an Asian American with this whole mask thing. And the last thing I want to say is, I think a big reason why I was pushing for a mask mandate was to minimize the possibility of being racially targeted. Because if everyone's doing it, there's a less chance, right? And you know, here we're still, people are still being like, it's my constitutional right not to wear a mask and things like that. But it's like, you know, this mask mandate will not only minimize the spread of COVID, but also minimize the fear that a lot of minorities have.
Thank you so much for sharing, Fanny. Go ahead, Asifa.
Sure. So I haven't had any direct experiences myself with mask discrimination or any issues with masks, but several friends and close family members have. And I think the experiences, the best way I can describe it is mask policing, or like it's crazy, because one member of my family, for example, someone close to me, was in a supermarket, and she just happened to go in through the side of the aisle. I mean, there's arrows going in, you know, on the floor, telling you which direction you can walk in and things like that. So she just happened to go into through the opposite direction in the corner because she's a senior, and you know, it's like no big deal, I don't think. But she was wearing a mask, and someone came up to her, you know, I think it was a white person, and chastised her for, you know, walking in the wrong direction. And she also kind of scolded her and said, you know, you're not wearing your mask properly. So, and that lady was not wearing a mask at all. And she then said, you know, she works for the government health department and things like that. Like, she was just a private citizen. And then I've heard other stories of, people being glared at or even scolded and told to wear their masks because they are persons of color. So I've heard several stories, and you know, if anybody tells me anything, I know the things I would say, but you know, it's quite ridiculous. It's just like, it's another form of policing or targeting or profiling. So I think that's what I've heard so far.
Thank you, Asifa. Anyone else before we move into the more fun part of the conversation about culture?
I was just gonna say that I personally really haven't had a ton of experiences with any kind of like discrimination. I think a big part of it is because I am mostly a stay-at-home mom. Even my courses are online. So like even today I like got my groceries delivered, so I don't really go out that often. And I think that when I do go out, I do wear a mask. But I think the majority of the time, because we have the kids, when I do go out, like if I do have to do like a chore or an errand, my husband is with me. And I think the fact that I do have like this big white guy next to me, it does change how I'm viewed and how people interact with me, which is like sad to say, but I think is the truth. That people, I think, because I've seen like on TikTok, for example, primarily like Black men who are like being accosted or being followed or having really negative interactions because they have this mask over their face. You can't see them, and people just automatically assume the worst, even though they're just going about their day. I've even seen one where a guy was saying he'd forgotten his mask in a car or something, and the owner, the guy behind the glass, literally refused to serve him, and he had turned on his video because as a guy, he said, here I am, you refuse to serve me, and here's this like white guy checking out, not wearing a mask, and you don't have a problem with him. So I think that it has opened up an avenue for people who are wanting to discriminate. Now they can like have a new way of discriminating against maybe people of color if they, like, for example, don't have a mask, where they wouldn't normally enforce it. Now they are going to enforce it, and they're going to choose who they enforce it with. Fortunately, it has not happened to me, but I've seen like people documenting it happening to them, and it does primarily seem to happen to, from what I could see, like men of color.
Thank you so much, Sharkisha. So my next question is, like I mentioned, going into the topic of culture. And so I want to turn to food, because I feel like food is, you know, it brings community, it brings love, it brings happiness. What do you think are some cultural food staples for your respective communities?
I can go first. For me, like I said, because I'm mixed, so I have two different like cultural, so like from my Dominican side, it's definitely going to be pernil. It's like this pork is like amazing. It's good. It has a crunchy shell that if you bake it, you've got to cook it all day. And we make like this sofrito rub with it, which is like onions, peppers, parsley, cilantro, like all these garlic, all these things mixed together. And you like rub it into the meat, you poke it, and it cooks like low and slow literally all day. You get like the crispy skin, and it just tastes like heaven in your mouth. So that's one thing, pernil. And then like obviously Spanish rice and beans. We eat it with like avocado, or we eat it with like actually like just a green banana, like a yellow banana, like a regular banana, mixed in with the rice and beans. And it sounds weird, but it tastes so good together. And it's not the same thing as plátano maduro or tostones. Those are different. Those are like the fried, but these are like actual just regular bananas. And it's good. And let's see. So that's like from my Spanish side, obviously batata, which is like I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's like a cross between like a potato and a sweet potato. And you can like fry it, you can boil it. Like normally we make it, like I grew up eating it like for breakfast, which is like you boil it and you mash it. No, you don't mash that one. You boil it and you eat it with like queso de freír, which is like a cheese that you fry. You make it with eggs, and you make it with like longaniza dominicana, which is like a Dominican, like, I don't know how you call it in English. I actually don't know how you call it in English, but it's similar to, I don't
What's
know.
the word? I might be able to help you out.
Longaniza dominicana. Oh, want me to type it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oops.
Longaniza is like a sausage, right?
Yeah, it's like a sausage. Exactly. It's like a skin sausage.
Yeah.
You fry that, and then or with salami, you fry it with salami, or even with ham, like slices of ham. And we do the same thing with like green plantains. You can boil it, you can mash it, you can fry it, you can eat it a lot of different ways. It's like really a big part of our culture though. So, and then from my Black side, we got hog chitlins, which a lot of people don't like, but I love it with hot sauce. Pig feet, I love that too. I've never had a pickle. I want to try it, but I haven't. Collard greens is like big. My grandmother, so she gets like the slab bacon and she like cooks it with that. She mixes it with like turnip greens, I think, or maybe it's, turnip greens. She cooks it together all day with the smoked neck bones. Man, it's so good. We do, what else do we do? Like the collard greens is a big thing. Besides the hog chitlins and the pig feet, I'm trying to think. Those are like the main things that I could think of. And like, obviously like the homemade cornbread and stuff like that. I don't know if that's really cultural, but like, it's like big for me, like in my culture. So yeah, those are like things like that I grew up, that's like a big deal.
Thank you.
I actually, let me think, 10 years ago now, did research on food and identity as an undergrad, and it involved a trip to the motherland. This was my first time going to Vietnam. My parents still haven't been back, even though they were born there. They haven't been back since my dad in 75 and my mom in 88. So it was like very nerve-wracking for my family because they left under very challenging circumstances and they couldn't imagine what the country was like now. So my research was about food identity and globalization, and I used pho, the national dish of Vietnam, as the kind of like vehicle for telling this story. And the story is, in the 20th century, Vietnam was colonized by 5 different nations just in the 1 century. And the staple that really, I would say, is representative of Vietnamese culture is taking what is in front of them or given to them and making it their own and making it better, called Vietnamization, if you will. So with pho, believe it or not, there are no cows indigenous to Southeast Asia. The French colonizers brought their own cows because they must have their boeuf. And what happened was the French would, butcher their cows, take what they wanted, I don't even know the parts of a cow, sorry. And they would just leave the bones, and the Vietnamese peasants would take what was left over and make a broth out of it. And so, even though pho is the national dish of Vietnam, it's not a very old dish, and it came as a result of, just necessity, because they were poor, they had nothing else around them, like, they're throwing this away, I'm gonna eat it, and it's great. So, other examples would be banh mi, the Vietnamese sandwich, that's a baguette, that's a French baguette. There is a Vietnamese crepe called bánh xèo, but it's savory instead of sweet. There's like a lot of broth dishes, noodle soups that came from Chinese colonization. What I think is really funny though, like, and then there's also ice cream that they took from the Americans. There's like they took it from the French, but they also took it from the Americans. So when it was like when Vietnam was colonized by the French, it was called carême for creme, but when it was American colonization, it was called gam for ice cream instead. So, you know, Vietnamese people, they're like, we're not going to make another word. We're just going to kind of say your word, but like in our like Vietnamese way. But what I think is really funny is that, you know, one of the world powers that colonized Vietnam in the 20th century was Russia. And even though like Vietnamese people took food from like all of these other people that came and tried to influence the culture, they looked at Russian food and they're like, we're good. We're not going to keep any of that. Y'all can have that. Okay. So there's some like, you know, there's some really old people in Vietnam who like speak Russian. They studied in Russia during the Cold War era. You can see like in the major cities some buildings that are like, wow, that's like real Soviet Union. But you will not find like, you know, a Vietnamese pierogi or anything like that in Vietnam. So that's the staple.
Thanks, Anna, for sharing that. That was great. Anyone else would like to go?
Yeah, I'm just gonna go a little bit on what Anna said in terms of how I guess the lower socioeconomic classes of people created something just from the bare means of what they were given. And so you notice that a lot in the Black community. We talk about it all the time, like no matter, and I think Sharkisha hit this too, just like us eating things like turnip greens and things like that. I know for sure in New Orleans, it's always about like greens, catfish, like seafood, po' boys, and red beans and rice. I know those are like the main staples. I haven't taken as many food journeys as I probably should have. But I know a lot of our dishes come from, you know, like the Vietnamese culture as well, in terms of like po' boys and things like that. Even like daiquiris coming from, you know, South America and, you know, the Caribbean. So just things like that. Well, like we have a lot of Haitian, just, you know, background in our food as well. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But we are, like they say, like the melting pot of everything. And so I don't necessarily know exactly, right? I mean, oftentimes Black people are identified with like soul food. So like mac and cheese and cornbread and things like that. And so I think that's not a problem to identify with that. And also like fried chicken, like if I can be honest with you, I haven't even shared this with anyone, but on Juneteenth, there was like this like social distance celebration that we had, and we had fried chicken, but I'm a pescatarian. And so, but I was just like something the ancestors are telling me this is going to be good. But I say that to say that is something that's universal with us. That is something that's universal with us, and something that we necessarily, like some people often see it as like a stereotypical thing. But like in the Black community, like we know that that is something that we own and we hone, and we've done great wonders into crafting it into so many different things. And so like we can get into all of the other things. I mean, and another thing that I like to think about also is fried fish. So we in the South love like fried fish and potato salad, but people in like Memphis love fried fish and spaghetti. Like, it's just, that's something that I'm learning about as like I have more and more friends around the country, just like how we have the same dishes that are not the stereotypical like soul food, like fried chicken, candy yams, and things like that. But just like we have these similar dishes and how we're making them into be what they're be. Because I think a lot of people think that we eat like ham hock and chitlins on like a regular basis, which is not true. We eat like Americanized food. Like we don't even eat food that is from like our maybe Caribbean background or things like that. So I think that is something unlike Anna, I haven't really gotten into, but that is something that, you know, is best explained probably by each region in itself. Yeah.
Thanks, KERRI. Anyone else before we move on to dating?
I did just want to add something.
Go ahead,
like I know
SHARKISHA.
that also too, like with a lot of our food, it does stem from like our history, like from being when we were slaves and how we were like given like the intestines, like pig feet and Hallmark chitlins, like what they didn't want to eat, and we incorporated that and made something great out of that. Even with watermelon, like when they were traveling, like watermelon was something that they could eat that would fill you up, and it's like it hydrates you too, and it's something that you can travel with and it will last a while. So that was like a lot of things, like they have these stereotypes, but it's like there's a history behind it as to why we eat it and like where it came from and why it has such a level of importance to us, because it was like nourishment for us when we didn't have anything else. And it's like goes back to, you know, being a slave and on to today.
Thank you, SHARKISHA. So now I want to go into romantic relationships and dating. So my question to you guys is, when it comes to romantic relationships or entanglements, as Jada Pinkett Smith came up with that term this year, how is dating viewed in your respective communities or in your family? And preferably interracial dating.
So I'll go. I think so my parents, they grew up in a generation where like, and I'm sure this is deeply felt across a lot of other cultures, where you get married young, right? And my parents, though, they married old being 28. And my parents, they support me, my siblings going to therapy, but they themselves are not very open to the idea. So I don't know if they've ever processed that, but I wonder how much of their experience of being married old, being leftovers, has impacted them in trying to encourage me and my siblings to get married at a young age. Because I still remember, like, even though, I still remember being like, by the time I remember saying this as I was like, by the time I'm 30, I want to have 4 kids and 2 dogs. If I don't have it by 30, then I'm not having any of them. Like, that was my mentality. And now I'm like, no, I don't want to have any kids. And I think part of that is, and I think one reason why I'm like, I'm not ready to have kids, is because I don't feel like I have processed enough of how romantic relationships work, and trying to figure out this whole cultural identity. I just don't feel prepared to like bring a child into his world and still being so confused about my own identity. With all that being said, when it comes to interracial dating, so I dated a Black man in college, and it set off, it was a very hard time in my life. That I'll leave it. It was a very hard time in my life. My parents, so my mom met my boyfriend at the time when she had visited New York City, and I was so surprised that she was open to that. I always thought that she would be the one that would be very much against me dating a Black man, but she at least tried to be supportive. And then a few months later, when my dad found out, oh man, the person who I did not expect to react so badly reacted very, very, very badly. I mean, long story short, he basically tried to disown me because of that choice. And a lot of it was because he had this racist perception about Black men, them being uneducated, them being my dad said, he said to me, he has a lot of tattoos. What, do you think he's going to be an NBA player? Like that, that is how he was seeing this. And I had to make the really hard decision. I was just like, Dad, I love you. And I know you want me to be happy, but right now it doesn't seem like you're prioritizing my happiness at all. And so I'm still going to, and God bless this man I dated, because he was like, should we break up? You know, he was like, should we break up? I mean, I don't want you to have this tension with your parents. I was like, no, because he is wrong. This is wrong. Even if, you know, even though I could understand that his beliefs were a creation of the upbringing that he had, I was just like, I am not going to give up my happiness, and I'm not going to in a way promote this racist thinking. And so my dad and I did not really talk about anything for a while, but then when my boyfriend and I broke up, the first person to call me was my dad, and he actually apologized. And he said, I'm so sorry I did that to you. That was wrong of me. And he was still trying to, you know, and so for me, like, even though both my parents, and with my mom, she, when I was dating him, she would ask me, why do you like Black men? And I would say to her, why are you asking me this question? And she actually put in the work to figure it out. I don't know how she figured it out, because she's not very fluent with in terms of using technology. She never went to school. She doesn't have friends, to my knowledge, that have that, but she just worked on it. I think ultimately for both of my parents, they're like, I love my kids. I sacrifice a lot for my kids, and if they are happy with this individual, I need to be happy for them. And actually, so at my NYU graduation, my mom said to my dad, and she told me this afterwards, my mom said to my dad, and this was when my dad and I still were not really talking, she was like, you need to let your daughter date whoever she wants. She's grown now. And that was just like, whoa. So yeah, and so, you know, in a way, I think I am, you could say I'm a little bit frightened from that experience, because I'm like, I don't know if I want to go through that again. But you know, because of that experience, though, I have a lot more gratitude and appreciation for my parents, because I know so many other people, especially if they're Chinese, who would never ever even get that opportunity to have those type of conversations with their parents.
Thank you, Fanny, for sharing. Would anyone else like to go?
So for myself, well, coming from a cultural background where, you know, it's the community kind of in South Africa, most people got married at a relatively young age, especially from the previous generations. And then relatively young could be anything from like 18, 19 to 27. And but when we came to Canada, and I don't know, maybe my family, immediate family, my parents are kind of an anomaly, because they gave us, like, you know, they never told us you can only date this kind of guy or that, you know, kind of person. It's like they gave us a lot of freedom and to go out there and choose our own mate. I mean, I haven't found Mr. Right yet, but like, I'm open personally to dating anyone from any culture. So yeah, I think it's just specific to families and to how strong, I mean, I know there's a lot of community pressure. If you live within a particular community and you identify strongly with them and you interact mostly with, you know, one type of community, then it's very easy to succumb to all those different pressures. And I do see it happening even in the younger generation, like younger than me. Some of my older nieces and nephews, you know, I mean, well, you know, there's all kinds of things that people have to think about when they're out there and dating, and a lot of it comes from expectations from family and culture. So, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to share?
I'll go.
Okay.
I know for me, I think because I'm such an eccentric person that literally nothing I did could surprise my parents. And I think I had an easier time of it, like dating outside of my like race or even gender, because my family just, then my siblings would have had, because my family just was like, okay, that's Keisha, she's extra, she's different. So, because when I was younger, like I was super open to like learning and knowing about different people and different cultures, and like, say for example, if there was a school trip that like was leaving the country or leaving the state, I was always like trying to go. And I also was like always into reading and knowing more about people, and I would ask a million questions. Like, I remember when I used to be a cashier like 100 years ago, and one of these girls, we had a couple of cashiers that were like Muslim. One of them was from Pakistan, and I forget where the other ones, the sisters were from, but they like were teaching me like how to speak some Arabic, and they like invited me over to their house, and like even they had like the meals, and like I forget where she's from, and I hate that I do, but like the way they ate was different. Like they had like the big pot and everyone sat around it, and like you just kind of like eat it with your hands. So I was always open and asking questions, and like I learned about arranged marriages from one of them, how like her marriage was arranged from the time she was 12 and how that went for her. And it was like, I always try to come from a place of non-judgment, just a place of learning, because I'm curious to know. So I think because of that, my parents was like not even slightly surprised. For me, like I always base my attraction on the person, like, do we align on a moral? Do we have the same kind of morals? Do we have the same kind of values? And it doesn't really matter to me, like, if we're from different cultures, if we're from even the same or different gender. Like, so none of that ever really bothers me. And I think that my parents just kind of like fell in line with that. Like, okay, that's her. Like, for example, my husband is trans. So he was, when we were dating, his name was Hillary. That was like almost 6, 7 years ago when we started dating. No, 8 years ago. And then he transitioned to Levi. And so I think the only person who really kind of struggled with that was one of my best friends. She knew like how important having kids was to me. And so when she found out that we were going to go on this journey together, she was kind of like, wait, so your kids are going to be mixed? And she was like, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out and like you have a mixed kid? And I was like, nothing. What do you know, like, you have a son and you're not with the father. What does it matter? I'm not going to love my child any less because they have a little less melanin than I do. You know, like, what do I care? I'm like, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. He was still born out of love. So like, that was like the only weird thing. And I think she even like checked herself, like that was really a stupid thing to ask. Like, it doesn't really matter. And I still to this day believe like, it really doesn't matter. Like, you can learn something from literally any and everybody. And does it culture, I mean, it matters in the sense that you want to respect other people's cultures, but I would never use like our differences to like set us apart, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's great. And so I have 2 final questions. So my second to last question is, what are some misconceptions about Black and Asian communities that you want to debunk right now?
I can start. I would say, you know, there have been throughout history marked and like specific events where the Black community and the Asian community have had conflict with one another. Like one example being the Rodney King uprisings in LA. I would say maybe another being around like the Chinese exclusion era, railroads, that kind of stuff. I just, whenever people want to make the assumption or kind of buy into this narrative that, you know, there is some sort of like animosity, just like inherent animosity between the Asian community, like Asians harbor this animosity towards the Black community, and the Black community harbors this animosity towards the Asian community. I just want to remind people that that is not something that we carry or possess innately or organically or on our own. It is a tool used by our oppressors to keep the lowest in society fighting amongst each other. You know, you see this in many different ways. When it was like the plantation era in the United States, it was creating colorism amongst the enslaved people, right? That's how you keep your power, is keep the lowest on the ladder fighting amongst themselves so they're not fighting you. So that's something that I want to like remind people of, just like, you know, like Asian people, just, you know, someone said earlier, like children aren't like inherently racist. That's something that is taught. So if anything, you know, any anti-Asian racism or anti-Black racism in any community is taught from our larger society. That person or that group has that because they learned it from everything that is around them.
That was great, Anna. Thank you so much. Anyone else would like to share?
I'll share. There is this misconception that Black people are innately more violent, and that's just not true. So I just want to like, Black communities are first over police. B, we're more likely to be sentenced for crimes that our like white counterparts are doing, and where they're more likely to get probation, or you know, like if they have a substance abuse, they're more likely to get the help, versus if you're in a Black community, they're more likely to throw the book at you. What a lot of people don't realize, like if you look at like the statistics or where DNA clears someone, Black people have the highest rate of being cleared, over 50%, because, you know, like, unless we have some special kind of DNA, there's a reason for that. It's because we have people who are being sentenced for crimes and they're innocent. A lot of people aren't aware of the system. And if you go into a court where you, for example, you are poor and you can't afford a lawyer, you have a public defender, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have your best interest at heart. So they may tell you, take a plea bargain, because if you don't, you're looking at these football numbers and it's intimidating and it's scary, and they think that their only recourse is to do this. And sometimes it unfortunately is their only recourse, because you have these judges with biases and schemas. And so that's just something that I want to like just clear up, that when people start bringing up, oh, look at Detroit and things like that, like that's like, we are not more violent than anyone else. We have societies where what's happening is you have police who don't live in your area, and they're, you know, they have quotas to fill, and they're actually being actively told to seek people of color, you know, to fill those quotas. They don't want to do it in their neighborhoods because that's so-and-so's son, or that's so the judge's nephew or something. So it's not like crime isn't happening. It's just less, you know, it's viewed at differently. So it's just something that I want people to like, when you think about like, when Black people are talking, especially when around the Black Lives Matter movement, and they have these negative connotations, they're like, what about Black on Black crime? Black on Black crime isn't a thing. It just doesn't. You never hear, what about white on white crime? What about Asian on Asian crime? It's not a thing. It's just something that they use to justify police brutality or the killing of Black people. And it also ignores like the poverty and systemic racism and the structures put in place for Black people who live in low-income areas where they're over-policing and mistreated and living below poverty lines. Even in regards to gang violence, when you have children who are dealing with trauma, and you have children who are dealing with racism and, you know, not being given resources and tools that they need, they're just kind of being like treated like, okay, because of who you are, I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. We have people who aren't even looking at them as children. They're looking at them as, you're a 12-year-old man. No, that's a child. That's a child who's dealt in trauma, who's trying to survive, and are being thrown into the system. And then because they are thrown into the system, they're less likely to be given a second chance. So you have recidivism, and it just is a vicious cycle, and it repeats. So I just want people to think of that, like, you're dealing with people who have this kind of trauma, who are like basically living in war zones, and then being ostracized by society and told that they're more inherently violent and criminals, and that just isn't the case.
You brought up some great things, Sharkisha. I appreciate that. Anyone else before we move on to our final question for our chat? I'm on mute. My final question is, okay, now that we've established, these misconceptions, what are some steps that we can take to unlearn or encourage other people to unlearn these stereotypes?
Call them out or call them in, depending on if you like them or not. Call them out or call them in, depending on how you feel about them personally. One thing that Anna and I have tried to do in the workplace is make it very, very uncomfortable. Anna is very good at this, and not to put you on the spot, but she's really good. And so it gives me the edge to say no, but she's right. And this is why she's right. Because if she stands out there on her own, trying to help people unlearn and debunk these stereotypes on a daily basis, and if she's just standing on her own, people are just going to see her as the angry woman of color that's just calling people out for nothing. And so there have been several times when she will say something and a white man will just say whoa, that's not what I meant like that, or why it didn't have to go this far, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, but it did. And let me tell you why. And so I think that's the simplest and easy way to start that. And I think unlearning within yourself. There's so much that I have to still do to unlearn just based on what I may see and know about my own culture and about other cultures. And it's just, as you grow and as you a lot of us are Gen X and, and millennials. So as the things that you understood from your past and growing up is not the ways that things should have been. In terms of, before I got into this conversation, I thought about the advertisement, I don't know what company it was. I don't know if it was a detergent company or what it was, but it was an advertisement, I think, from somewhere in an Asian detergent or laundry company, something of that matter. Anyways, they put a black man in a washer and he came out white. And I say that to say, it's just, we have to know that these ideas and ideologies are still being spread around through media, through just far out there interpretations of how we live our lives and what we're doing in society. And I mean, it's just how you guys just said, what are the theories that we want to debunk, right? I personally think it's just taking us to call people out, call people in, show people your way of life, and don't be afraid to share your culture, right? Because they're always thinking oh, is this her culture? Is this not her culture? Is this the thing or is this not the thing? Embrace your culture as much as you can and as much as you want to. If you're not comfortable with putting it all out there, then you don't have to. But I definitely embrace my Southern Black American culture from so many different facets, and I bring that to the table in the workplace. And so sometimes I will speak with EBANKS and colloquialisms in a meeting, and some people will get it and some people won't get it. We have a few people from the South on our team. I think oftentimes Anna gets it when we are talking in certain colloquialisms. But yeah, some people will get it, some people won't get it, but bring your full self to the table.
I loved everything about that, KERRI. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else before I turn it over to our founder and publisher, Michelle?
Just to piggyback off what KERRI said, I 100%, I like to make it uncomfortable for people when they say things for example, if someone's oh, I can't live in that area, or, and I'm why? Well, and I'm no, explain why, and I'll force them to acknowledge what they're saying and why they're saying it, and let it get uncomfortable. And oftentimes they realize oh, okay, I'm coming from this place. I remember even in jokes, like their jokes can be racist. And like, if they try to make a joke, a racist joke, and I'll call them out on the spot, and I'm like, why is that funny? You know, and I dead serious face. And I'm like, no, you know what I mean. I'm like, no, explain what you mean, you know, and I let it get uncomfortable. And I force them to admit what they don't want to say, you know. And if they don't want to admit it, you're like, well, why did you think it was okay to say? Or, you know, like, oh, you're trying to twist it. I'm like, I haven't twisted anything. I'm asking you to explain what you said. And if you're uncomfortable explaining why, you maybe need to confront yourself and ask yourself why. You know, you're saying something that it's uncomfortable for you to say in front of me. So yeah, definitely call them out on it. Let it get really comfortable.
Yeah, and sorry if I may quickly.
Go for it.
So I agree totally with what KERRI said, and you know, either call them out or call them in. So I do a bit of both in my own personal life. You know, there are moments when, for example, just a few weeks ago, I was in a big department store and I was trying on something in front of a mirror instead of going to the dressing room because it was just, you know, sweater or something, and someone came up to me and she asked me something as if I was, you know, working there, and I said, like, you know, I immediately said, do I look like I work here? I mean, like, how do you know I work here, right? And just because I'm brown, you think you assume that I work here, and they're like, oh, no, you know. So, but on the other hand, like in my just general life, I like to interact with people from vast different cultures, all different cultures. And I think one important thing that was a theme that was going out on throughout this session was food. So I think food is a great way to get people together and learn about each other's cultures. And it's about, you know, breaking bread and realizing that we're all basically human, you know, and we're all looking for the same kinds of things in life. So, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. This was such a great conversation. I've learned a lot today, personally. So I just appreciate for all of our panelists and Fanny who had to leave. We appreciate, you know, everything that she brought to the table. And now I want to turn it over to Shade's founder and publisher, Michelle FITZHUGH-CRAIG.
Thank you, Sydney, and thank you, ladies, so much. KERRI, Anna, first time, we appreciate you. Keisha, Asifa, and Fanny, who had to leave, but we appreciate each and every one of you with today's discussion. I just wanted to say a little something on culture and wanted to invite everyone to join us, the community, Friday, November 27th for an event. It's called the Bruce Lee Birthday Blitz, the San Francisco Bay Area celebration. And it's a day-long event that's live on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to honor Bruce Lee on what have been his 80th birthday. Now, I bring this up for a couple of reasons. As many people know, Bruce Lee was a movie star, a martial arts expert. He was an entrepreneur who disrupted Hollywood and the entertainment industry. And he was an athlete. But what a lot of people don't know, he was significantly influenced. He significantly influenced many other races, especially the African American community, and here in Oakland and the Bay Area as well. He was a poet and a philosopher. And part of our talk today was kind of based around this upcoming event. Shades is a media supporter for it and a media sponsor for the We Are Bruce Lee exhibit, which will be in San Francisco next week. And I want to also thank our managing editor, Janice Lee, who helped with this today's discussion to kind of, you know, she came up with the idea of having this discussion between our two ethnic groups because it's one that is kind of misunderstood sometimes, and then other times people think, oh, there's no issues. And it was just a chance, like we do with all our real talks, to put some things on the table and talk about it. So if you need any more information, you can visit wearebrucelee.org or look up We Are Bruce Lee on all the social media platforms. If you have questions that come to mind later on this talk, other talks, or ideas and topics you'd like to see, or if you'd like to become part of the Shades Magazine team or Exceptional Women in Publishing, please contact us at infoshadesmagazine@gmail.com or DM us at any of our social media accounts. And a final reminder that today's discussion was recorded and will be uploaded for viewing, sharing, beginning next week. Additionally, the opinions, viewpoints, and our personal endorsements expressed in any published print, audio, or video content like today's Real Talk are those of the individual only and do not necessarily represent the views of Shades Magazine or Women in Periodical Publishing, Exceptional Women in Publishing. And as I turn it back over to Sydney, I just want to wish each of you a health and safe holiday season, positive energy, and just, you know, be safe out there. We've got numbers rising, you know, we've got to be careful and don't be selfish and respect one another. And I believe we're still going to have a Real Talk next month. We'll get back with you and hope you will join us then too. Sydney.
Thank you, Michelle. And a tradition I like to do is just to wrap up with a quote that I think pretty much emphasizes the importance of this conversation. So this is a quote from Robert Allen Arthur, who said, "Cultural differences should not separate us from each other, but rather cultural diversity brings a collective strength that can benefit all of humanity. And also, intercultural dialogue is the best guarantee of a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world." So with that being said, thank you again for everyone for joining today, and have a safe and healthy Thanksgiving holiday and the rest of your holiday season as well. Take care.